And so I never thought about being a judge because I thought, well, to be a judge, don't you have to know someone or you have to run for election? Or I really didn't understand that process at all. So I never really thought about becoming a judge until the opportunity presented itself.
Welcome to Roll Call, Reflections on Leadership and Legacy. This is the podcast where we sit down with trailblazing Asian American business and community leaders to explore their journeys, challenges, and triumphs. Each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories and experiences that have shaped their paths to success, resilience, and impact. From overcoming adversity to leaving a lasting legacy, we celebrate the diverse voices and powerful leadership that are shaping our communities and our world. I'm your host, Holly Gertis, and together we'll hear firsthand accounts of what it truly means to lead with purpose and build a lasting legacy in the Asian American community. Welcome to another episode of Roll Call. Our guest today is the Honorable Justice Carla Wong McMillian. Hello, Justice McMillian.
Hello.
Thank you for coming today. We are so excited and honored to have you today on our episode. Could you tell our audience some background of your early days and of your family? Everyone's curious about your background and your history.
Yeah, I was born and raised in Augusta, Georgia, which many people know as the home of the Masters golf tournament. But Augusta is historical in another sense in that it has one of the oldest Chinese communities in the Southeast.
Wow.
My family actually came to Augusta over 100 years ago. My grandfather first came to the United States, I think in the early 1900s. I really don't know. My dad told me he was in San Francisco for the earthquake in 1906. But we do know that he eventually came to Augusta. There was a Wong cousin who lived there, and he made it to Augusta. And then in 1914, he actually went back to China to marry my grandmother. She was from a neighboring village in the southern part of China, Guangzhou province. And they came back to the United States the following year, stayed in San Francisco for a few months, and then came back to Augusta and started their family. My dad was the youngest of 6 kids. And he was, my grandparents operated a grocery store in Augusta, just a mom and pop grocery business, which many of the Chinese in Augusta did, because in that time during in the segregated South, the white grocers were pressured to not serve African American customers. So the Chinese established grocery stores in the African American community, and they often lived in the back rooms of those stores, and that's what my family did. And my dad was actually born at home behind the grocery store in Augusta.
Now, how did your grandparents pick Augusta?
Well, I'm not really sure, but I know that in the 1870s, after the Civil War, the Augusta Canal was being built, and they needed workers for the canal. And I know that the Chinese first came to Augusta to work on that project. And it's my understanding is that most of them came from the Guangzhou province, and they started telling their friends and family about Augusta, and they started coming over after that.
Did your grandparents and parents talk about their experience of growing up in Augusta, how hard it was to, start a business, in the United States, let alone Augusta back then?
Yeah, I mean, they talked about it some, and I don't know about how they were able to establish the business. I think the banks were willing to do business with them versus some African American customers, and so I assume that they got some sort of funding for that. As far as growing up in Augusta, I mean, they did all the things that I think just an average Southern person would do growing up in that time period. I mean, they went to the public schools. They would eat collard greens and other Southern delicacies. I've heard about that. Um, and they had, they rode their bikes and had their friends, and it was
It seems
just a
they
normal childhood.
it seems they integrated as fully or as much as they could with American culture and society then.
I think they did, but they also retained their Chinese culture because there was a Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association, which was it was a group that they was formed where the Chinese families got together, and there was actually a building, and they had Chinese school there. They celebrated Chinese holidays there, and so that was really central to that Chinese community. But then, apart from that, uh, the Chinese families, they went to church. They went to the churches that were in Augusta. Primarily during that time was the First Baptist Church, because the First Baptist Church actually reached out to the Chinese community and formed a Chinese Sunday school, for instance. They were very much integrated in the community, but also had their own community within the CCBA.
And what was your Asian American experience growing up in Augusta?
I grew up in the CCBA, and so most of the people there were relatives. I mean, it was a very small community, and there were several different families. So I had that experience. But then going to school, I was the only Asian person in my class all the way through growing up. I'd never had another Asian person in my class at school, and there were only a couple of other families within the school as well. I went to a private school. I was the only one, but I was just part of the community. That was what I was used to.
Yeah, and I was adopted 6, and I was the only Asian American in my school. And for the most part, I had an amazing experience, and everyone was kind. And I guess it's a small town thing too, where everybody looked out for each other. You knew everybody. And but there were, some challenges and stereotypes, younger. Did you face any of those challenges or stereotypes when you were younger?
I really don't remember facing much. I mean, I think kids sometimes make fun of other kids for other variety of things, and I can remember kids talking about, my eyes being slanted and things like that, which is it's not great. But very few and far between. I can only remember maybe a couple instances of things like that. But kids
will be kids.
Kids
right?
will be kids and do things like that. But for the most part, I mean, I had friends, and we would spend the night at each other's houses, and go do things together, and so it was a pretty normal childhood.
What did you learn from watching your parents when they were raising you, how they lived their life and how they dealt with challenges and obstacles in their life, which every human being faces? But sometimes, being the minority in a town has its own unique challenges. But what did you learn from your mom and dad that you feel like has shaped who you are?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, my dad was born in Augusta, but my mom actually immigrated from Hong Kong. So she had a whole different viewpoint and experience, and really didn't speak English all that well. We spoke Chinese at home. So I learned Chinese from her primarily because that's what she spoke. And she did not have any further education, but she worked really hard. She worked hard I'm the oldest of 5 kids. So when we were younger, she was at home with us. But then after that, she went and she got her cosmetology license and started doing hair. And then she also worked at a restaurant and just worked really hard for us. My dad, on the other hand, he actually became very sick when I was, I was like maybe 6 or 7 years old. He had lung cancer when I was very young and ended up having to retire from his job because of his cancer. He survived the lung cancer, which is pretty remarkable, but then he had a number of other health issues throughout my childhood. It ended up he passed from cancer when I was 16. So so I learned from him just how to keep going, even though, I mean, he was facing a lot of challenges with his health. And, being a father for 5 kids and also facing the cancer, and he had a heart attack, and he had, there were all sorts of challenges that he had to overcome.
And wow, your mother then had to take over the family then.
Yes.
Wow.
And she had to work outside of the home. And when I was little, she didn't know how to drive.
Wow.
She had to learn how to drive her car. I remember her learning how to drive her car. And she was very little. She was like maybe 4'8", I think. Wow. Very small. But learned how to drive these big cars and drive the family around.
Wow. So do you think you got the toughness and resilience and whatever from your mom when you saw her having to step up and take care of all the family by herself?
I think both of them are pretty tough.
Yeah.
My dad actually, he went to the Citadel for college.
Wow.
I mean, and had that made him a very strong person, having to go through that. And he served in the military for a few years before he was honorably discharged and came home to work in the family store. And then he became he was a chemist, and he worked in the lab at the Medical College of Georgia before he had to retire. But he was a very tough person as well.
Yeah. Other than your mom and dad, do you have a mentor that you feel like impacted you the most in who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I have had a number of mentors over the years, people I've looked up to. I think when I was younger, my Aunt Margaret was someone I looked up to. She was my father's, one of my father's sisters, and she went to college and went through a accelerated program because it was during World War II, and then ended up going to the Medical College of Georgia and became a medical doctor, and was the first Asian American woman to get an MD in the Southeast.
Oh, wow.
So she graduated in the 1940s. Wow. From the Medical College of Georgia. And so she was a big influence on me growing up. I mean, she was a first as well. But then later on, one of my other mentors is I worked for Judge O'Kelly in the Northern District of Georgia right out of law school for a year. And he was a huge mentor in my life. I started my career with him, and every step of the way up until this last position, he was always advising me, encouraging me. He was always the first person I called when I was making changes in my career. He passed in, I think it was 2017, but I mean, he was a huge influence in my path to the bench.
Why did you choose the law as your career?
Well, actually, did not intend to be a lawyer when I went to college. I was very interested in history and economics, and thought that I was going to become a high school history teacher. I had planned to go get my Master's of Arts in Teaching when I came home one summer and ran into my speech and debate coach from high school, and he asked me what I wanted to do, and I told him, and he said, "You really should think about law school."
You never thought about that until then?
Not really, not seriously.
Wow.
I had not thought about it until then, and I started thinking about it, and decided I was going to go to graduate school. So either I was going to take the GRE and go to graduate school, or I would take the LSAT and go to law school. And I decided to go to law school.
And what was the ultimate reason or factor that made you choose that instead of?
I was thinking about trying to get a PhD in history, or at least a master's degree in history. And one of the requirements for that is you have to learn another language.
Mm,
And I thought, do I really want to do that? And so I decided to go to law school. I didn't have to learn another language to go to law school.
okay. And after law school, then where did you end up?
So I worked for Judge O'Kelly for a
Yeah.
year in Atlanta, and then I was with the law firm Sutherland Asbill and Brennan, which is now Evershed Sutherland, but back then it was Sutherland Asbill and Brennan, one of the larger firms here in Atlanta.
And did you face any challenges and obstacles in your legal career that, we look back on those and now we're grateful for them, but at the time it's difficult to get through. But did you face any challenges that you feel like, shaped who you are again, that you are today?
Yeah, I think working in a fast-paced, big firm environment is challenging for anyone. And so, when you're a younger associate, you work a lot of hours, work really hard to learn your craft. But I was lucky. The firm gave me a lot of responsibility early on, so I was taking depositions, going to court, that type of thing, which was very, very helpful. I worked on some appeals, which is very helpful for my current position.
And what advice would you give for new attorneys that are going into law firms that, to move on up and to get in more leadership and getting, on cases and being able to really be in the partnership track? That, sometimes I think, especially for any minority group, they feel like it's slower or they have disadvantages. And the other side is use who you are as an advantage. I don't know what goes into the partnership track. I'm not in the law firm field, but what advice would you give in particular to Asian Americans that look at Justice McMillian and go, wow, how did that happen? How can I make that happen for me?
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to speak to this current generation because things are so different now than when I first started. I think for this generation, I would encourage people to go to the office
Yes.
and work, because you make a lot of relationships that way. You get a lot of good work that way because the partner sees you in the hall or you're available to help with a project. And that's not necessarily the case if you're working from home. And so I would encourage young people to come into the office, to make those connections, to build those relationships with their partners, to build those relationships with their clients, and to also build relationships with other lawyers, because that's where you get a lot of your business from, referrals. And so be involved with the legal community, whether it's through the State Bar of Georgia or other organizations like GAPABA, which has been a great resource for me and other Asian American and non-Asian American lawyers. GAPABA has members from everywhere. So I would encourage people to just get involved and establish their networks and work really hard.
And GAPABA, which is a Georgia Asian Pacific American Bar Association, I think it has over 750 members now.
Yes, it's amazing how many members we have.
So how do you feel about, GAPABA and its role in helping Asian American lawyers? Because when we were younger, we didn't have those types of organizations. I mean, they may have existed, but they were very small. But to have organizations like GAPABA, to be able to network with other Asian American lawyers who are successful and doing what you are recommending, get out there networking. How important do you think that is to keep that going, to keep it growing for this upcoming generation that is more isolated? They like to be alone more. They're at home more. And, how important do you feel like GAPABA is in that role of helping this younger generation in their evolution of their legal career in general?
Yeah, I think APABA is really important for young Asian American lawyers because it provides a resource for them from law students to more senior lawyers.
Mm.
GAPABA has a young lawyers and law students division. They have a lot of great events where you get to meet other young people, and then they also try to introduce you to some more senior lawyers. And they have other programming as well, where you our gala, where you meet lawyers not just from GAPABA, but um, from the national organization. Members come from out of town to go to the gala, and you get to meet judges and general counsels and other people that you normally wouldn't be able to meet. And so I think APABA is really important in terms of bringing people together.
How do you feel like your Asian American background and the culture that you were raised in, was there anything that you feel like helped shape your success, that part of your culture and your history from your family? How do you feel like that shaped or, got you to where you are today as this Justice McMillian on a personal and obviously the professional level?
Yeah, I mean, I think being the only Asian American in your class or your school, um, I think I just learned how to stand out because
Mm.
um, I mean, I think being an Asian American has its advantages and disadvantages. I think an advantage is people remember you because you're the only one.
Yeah.
I mean, I can go back to my law school, and I went to University of Georgia, and professors will remember me. And my husband actually also went to law school there too, but the professors aren't going to remember him as well because I was the only Asian person in my class. So it's easier to remember me. Um, but I think that I did have to, I felt like I had to work harder to prove myself because there weren't many Asian Americans, especially in litigation.
Mm.
Most of the Asian American lawyers I know are in IP or maybe corporate. And I think more recently there's been more Asian American litigators, but I certainly didn't know a lot of Asian American litigators when I was a young lawyer.
And did you have to overcome this? And this is stereotype, whether it's true or not, of Asian American lawyers being more quiet, non-confrontational, and just work hard, right? Other than that, I don't know. Did you face any of those stereotypes that, whether they're true or not, did you face that in your legal career?
Well, I think people probably assumed that I was quiet
Mm-hmm.
because of my Asian face,
Yep.
but I just had to prove that, I had a voice and I could speak up and I knew what I was doing and I was prepared. And so, yeah, sure. I think I had to overcome that.
Being at the forefront and being a trailblazer where a lot of the Asian Americans are looking at you, how do you, and looking towards mentorship, not directly, but they're watching you. How do you feel like the Asian American lawyers have evolved, seeing how they've evolved over time? Do you feel like there is a positive evolution of Asian American lawyers, in part to GAPABA too, but in what they're doing? Have you seen, or do you believe that we are moving on up into the partnership track, the CEOs in the corporate? Do you see that, and do you feel like we're moving in a positive direction and moving faster towards those leadership roles?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, and I can only speak to the South because, I mean, I
Yeah.
think things are very different, say, in California or maybe Hawaii, where there's a very, very large Asian American population. So I can't speak to that. But I think in the South, where there's just not as many Asian Americans generally, that having Asian Americans in leadership roles encourages the next generation, I hope, to aspire to that as well.
Yeah. And, there are many AAPI organizations, and a lot of them are dying a little bit, with the older generation retiring, how important do you feel like it is to have these different AAPI organizations to continue with the younger generation, which it's getting harder to recruit younger generation because they don't know the history of a lot of these leaders in these AAPI organizations, and they're not, talking about their history. And but it is getting harder to recruit the younger generation into these AAPI to advocate for Asian Americans, to be there when Asian Americans need help in the community. So the community-wise is not as strong with the younger generation. And so what do you feel about that, and how important do you think it is to try to continue the AAPI organization with the younger generation, even though it's getting harder for them to participate?
Yeah, I mean, maybe things just need to evolve. I'm not really sure because I face the same thing. I
Yeah.
have two children, one's 17, one's 21. And to be candid, I don't think they're interested in joining Organization of Chinese Americans or things.
Yeah.
They probably see that as an organization for people of my generation,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
they aren't that interested in it. But maybe there are other organizations that they may be interested in. I know, for instance, my alma mater, Duke University, just within the past several years formed the Duke Asian Alliance, which is an alumni
Mm,
association for Asian Americans for the first time ever.
yeah.
And maybe it's those kinds of organizations that will take the lead in encouraging other Asian American leaders in the future. Maybe these other organizations can partner with these newer organizations.
And how do you maintain or balance the Asian American culture with the American culture in your family?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit easier with my mother, who has since passed. But when my kids were smaller, we'd always go home for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and we would celebrate holidays with my family.
Mm.
But my mom would always cook Chinese food,
Mm.
and she would speak Chinese to them. That she grew up in Hong Kong, so she was much more familiar with that culture. I mean, I grew up here. I grew up in Augusta. I mean,
Yeah.
I really don't have much experience with Chinese culture, um, and my kids are generally interested in Chinese culture. I mean, they actually, both of them took Mandarin Chinese in high school.
Mm.
Even though my family speaks Cantonese, but they wanted to take Chinese, so they're learning about Chinese language and culture through the Mandarin
Mm.
classes. And then recently, my son, he's a junior at Kennesaw State University. He's taking a class on, I think it's like a documentary film class or something like that, where he has to do a project on a civil justice issue, and he came up with several Asian American topics that he wanted to explore because he's interested in that. So, I mean, I think that I've developed an interest in learning about their culture and background,
Mm.
and now that they're growing up a little bit, they seem to be wanting to explore that.
Mm. Wonderful. On the Court of Appeals and your fast trajectory to the Supreme Court, what has been your experience, and what are you most proud of? And maybe what has been the most challenging being on the bench on the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, it's just been an honor to be on the state appellate court, whether it's the Court of
Mm.
Appeals or the Supreme Court. I mean, I was appointed to the Court of Appeals in 2013. Prior to that, I was a state court judge, trial court judge in Fayette County. And when I was appointed to the Court of Appeals, I can remember driving into Atlanta, seeing the skyline, and just being so honored to be
Mm.
able to serve the state of Georgia in that way, and to uphold the rule of law, to uphold the independence of the judiciary. Um, and I think that is the biggest challenge these days now, with the attacks on the judiciary and questioning of the rule of law, that it's incumbent on judges and lawyers to educate the public about how important it is that we uphold the rule of law, that we decide cases not based on fear or favor or affection for one side or the other or bias. We decide it based on the law. And so I hope that would be my legacy to the courts.
And the being on the bench, do you see, based on the population of Asian Americans, the lawyers in turn reflecting that diversity in population to represent them? How do you see the evolution of the diversity in the court system now, from the time that you were a state court judge to Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court? Do you see that improving? Because here you have a lot of minorities in the court system, even in Gwinnett. If you go there, it's a lot of Koreans and Asian Americans. But the lawyers, still, the disparity is huge. And we have one, Judge Alvin Wong, in the state court. What do you see, and how do you see this evolving over time?
Yeah, I mean, I still think that Asian Americans don't necessarily go into litigation versus other areas of the law. And so, of course, you're not, if Asian Americans aren't going in litigation, you're not going to see them in court.
Yeah.
I did see more Asian American lawyers when I was in the trial court bench. Not so much on the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, because the lawyers who tend to do appellate work, they're very specialized.
Yeah.
And maybe just a few Asian American lawyers I know who've done appeals. But for the most part, I have not seen many Asian American appellate lawyers, but I'd love to see them.
Yeah. By the way, did you imagine of being a judge before you even got appointed or asked to be? Did you ever imagine that you would, or you wanted to be a judge?
No, I never thought about being a judge. I was the first lawyer in my family, and really didn't know much about the legal system or, what lawyers did. And I just I went to law school, and then I did what the law school told me to do, which is drop resumes at big law firms, and then try to get a clerkship, because if you want to go to litigation, you should get a clerkship. And so I just did everything they told me to do. And so I never thought about being a judge, because I thought, well, to be a judge, don't you have to know someone, or you have to run for election? Or I really didn't understand that process at all. So I never really thought about becoming a judge until the opportunity presented itself.
So can you describe the process and the experience of running for a state court position, Judge?
So I originally was appointed to my state court position. And here in Georgia, the judges run for election. But if there's a vacancy between elections, then the governor appoints. And so that's how I got my position in state court in Fayette County. But then after the appointment, the judge has to run for election to keep his or her seat. And so that was one of the reasons, frankly, I initially did not want to apply for the position of trial court judge in my home circuit, because I knew that I had to run for election to keep my seat, and that wasn't something that I was really interested in doing. But what changed my mind were my two kids at the time. They were little. They were 4 and 8, or 3 and 7, very, very young. And especially for my daughter, I wanted to be able to show her the importance of stepping out of my comfort zone and taking a risk and serving the community where she would be growing up. And so that's when I put in for state court. It was Superior Court at the time, and I got appointed to state court. That was in 2010. Soon after that, my worries came to fruition, and that I did get a challenger for my first election, which was 2012. I had to campaign for about a year, and it was difficult because if you've ever been to Fayette County, there's maybe 4% or fewer Asian Americans. There's not an Asian American population I could rely on. And so I had to just go out and introduce myself to the community. Of course, I had lived there for many years, and so had a lot of friends in the churches and the schools in the area and that sort of thing and through my community work, but still had to go out and present myself. And, the voters in Fayette County, they accepted me and they elected me by overwhelming majority. And it was never about me being Asian American or being a woman, even though I was the first woman to be a state or Superior Court judge in that circuit. Like they had not
you are the first of many.
Yeah, and so I was different from any other previous judges that had run. I presented myself as someone who would work hard and who would uphold the rule of law, who would decide cases based on the law and not based on any biases. And the voters elected me based on that.
When you were campaigning, what did you learn about yourself? Because that, running a contested race is, a marathon, and whatever you went through and you won overwhelmingly. Did you learn anything about yourself campaigning?
Yeah, campaigning gives you a lot of fortitude because you have to put yourself out there and be able to introduce yourself to a group of people. And sometimes you go to these events and they say, okay, you have 3 minutes. You have 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
7 minutes to talk about yourself and what you stand for. And as a judge, of course, you can't take any positions on cases or issues that are pending before the court. So as in a judicial race, when you're campaigning, you're really campaigning on who I am as a person, whether I'm the type of person you want as a judge, because I can't campaign on issues.
Yeah.
And so you have to be able to introduce yourself to people and, take stock of, what do you believe in and be able to present that to folks. And also campaigning is hard because you never know where you're standing in any one particular moment. It's not like a small race. You're not going to have polling or anything like that where you can tell whether are you winning? Are you losing? You don't know until election day happens, and you look at the vote totals at the end of the day. So it's a lot of uncertainty related to that, and all you can know is whether you're working hard. And so I tried to make it a point every day to do something related to the campaign. If it wasn't an event, I was writing notes. I was making calls. I knew I was going to work hard to keep my seat, and I put the work in and ended up winning that race.
And anybody that, wants to run a campaign for whatever position or judge, what advice would you give them?
Well, I would encourage them to get a lot of support and help, because as lawyers, you're not trained on running a campaign. And so there are professionals out there who were able to help craft the campaign and all of that. So I would encourage you to do that. But then other than that, just you have to work at it. One of the best pieces of advice that I got from was a congressman at the time. He said, you have to go ask people for the vote.
Just ask.
Yeah. People vote for candidates who ask for their vote, who listen to them, who take the time to talk to people. So I went and asked people to vote for me.
And when people talk about you, Justice McMillian, it's always about sincerity. They always see that about you, that you're so sincere about who you are. And you're very intentional. And, I think that's, in my opinion, and I think everybody's opinion that gets to know you, that's what comes across and why you overwhelmingly won your election is people are looking for sincerity. They're looking for transparency of who you are. And we're in a generation now where, we seem transparent about everything, but it's not really who they are. And we hide behind whatever. But my experience from talking to everybody about you is that's the one thing that it always comes across, is that you are absolutely sincere about who you are and what you are passionate about, and you love people. And I wanted to say that to you because that's why people always want to know who you are, know how you got here, and they admire, everything that you've done, absolute first of minis. And the other thing that I want to touch upon, the judiciary, is the mental health. I come from a generation of lawyers, and I think you do too, where that was never mentioned. You never talked about it. And the legal profession, people don't realize how hard it is if you are very conscious and diligent and hardworking about your legal career and when you're representing clients. And that bleeds into your home. And so, how do you feel like now that we talk about it and it's not something that we just hide behind and just put it away while we keep working until we break down? And so on the judiciary and the experience that you've had, how do you feel about, now being more transparent, and also the state bar, helping out more about your mental health? And if you don't take care of that, you are not being the best lawyer that you can be for your clients.
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate your comments about my sincerity, because I still feel like I'm that little girl who just grew up in that a little Asian family in Augusta, and I am honored to be in the place where I am, and I never want to change from that. As far as mental health, I think it's great that we are having conversations now about mental health, that the state bar has programming to support lawyers' mental health. They have the Use Your Six program, which all lawyers in Georgia have 6 calls that they can make, or appointments that they can make with a therapist or other person they can talk to if they are facing any issues. As for me, what keeps me sane, I think, is first of all, my family and my faith. And I think that's important for all lawyers, no matter what you believe, to have a life outside of the law, because the law can consume you. Your clients can consume you. The work can consume you. But I've spent a lot of time, raising my kids, and really enjoyed when they were younger, and now they're getting older and they're like doing their own things now. And my church as well, my church family. I've been in the same church for over 25 years now, and it's home away from home, and I have my friends there who don't know me as a judge. They know I am a judge, but they don't know me as a judge. They're just friends.
And when you talk about faith and your philosophy in life, what do you feel like, or convey to our audience, what your philosophy and faith, how that has shaped who you are? And if you can give any guidance on those that are, they don't have that faith or that philosophy to guide them, because I believe you have to have something you believe in morally, just some compass to give you something that you can believe in that will make you a better human being. And so, what has been your foundation for being what people consider just a great human being, let alone being Justice McMillian, but being a great human being? What has been the foundation for you that carries you every day, when you're on the bench, when you're at home, when you're exhausted, when you have challenges? What is that makes you get through the day?
Yeah, I think my faith keeps me grounded. And for me, it's knowing what's right and what's wrong. And by the way, I don't judge cases based on that. I know a lot of people have that misconception that judges decide cases based on what they feel like. But if you're a good judge, a lot of times you're making decisions based on the law, even though personally you might not want to make that decision, but you're following the law. So I just want to make that clear, that although my faith is important to me, I don't use it to decide cases. But it is important. My faith is important to keep me grounded, because I know what my worth is because of my faith. I know how to conduct myself because of my faith. I know how to treat other people because of my faith. And so I think a lot of, how I interact with people is based on my faith, because I believe everyone is worthy of being respected. And so that's how I'd like to treat other people.
What are your 3 favorite books?
Oh, my 3 favorite books. I guess I'll make a plug some of my more recent favorite books. My husband is actually an author.
Oh, really?
He's a lawyer. He's a law professor at John Marshall Law School.
Mhm.
But in his spare time, he also writes legal thrillers.
Oh, really?
So I would not be a good wife if didn't say that his books are some of my favorite, and they are some of my favorite
Wow.
books.
I did not know that.
Yes. So he's written 5 books. He's working on a 6th, and it's a series. It's a, like I said, legal thriller, and a lot of the stories are based on some of our experiences.
Mhm.
So, for instance, he has one where he murders the Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court in this building where we're
Oh.
sitting. Or he's murdered.
That's very close to
Yes, it's
yeah.
very close, and
Yeah.
he's killed off a president of the State Bar of Georgia at the annual meeting. Things,
Yeah.
and so those for me are books I enjoy reading because they take me away from the really serious work that we do. They're more enjoyable
Mm.
reading.
And on your spouse, on that topic, how do you feel like what role has your spouse been in your career and your personal life that's impacted who you are in your success? I always believe the family that plays together, whether it's work or not, they stay together. And behind every successful person is usually a spouse behind the scenes. And so what role has your husband played in your success?
I think we've done a lot to support each other in our success and our each of our careers. And a lot of times people talk about how do you balance work-life balance and that
Mhm.
sort of thing. And what I like to tell young lawyers is that sometimes your life is unbalanced.
Yeah.
At any particular time. If you're taking a case to trial, your life during that period of time is going to be unbalanced. Can't help it.
Yeah.
But it's great to have a spouse who can help pick up the pieces
Yeah.
and keep things going. And I do the same for him as well. And so, I think we wouldn't each be in the places where we are without the support of the other person.
And, for anybody that, I would love to see a judiciary that has more Asian Americans. What advice would you give for anybody that wants to be a judge?
Yeah, and first of all, I mean, it's really hard to predict that,
Yeah.
right? Because a lot of times it's based on circumstances. Like I never thought I would be a judge, and it just happened that 2 out of the 4 Superior Court judges in my circuit resigned, and they were looking for new judges at that time. I mean, you can't predict that is going to happen. You have to be a lot of times it has to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
But what I tell young lawyers is that you can make sure that if that time comes, you're prepared. So you need to be the best lawyer that you can possibly be, to network. And sometimes I tell young lawyers, especially young Asian American lawyers, that sometimes it's better to be a big fish in a small pond and not live in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's so many lawyers in Atlanta that it's very competitive to become a judge in Atlanta, versus if you were in a rural county where the bar is very small,
Yeah.
you can become a very successful lawyer and well-known lawyer within that town and become a judge there. But it's difficult. You may be the only Asian person in your little
you can
town.
stand out.
Right, but you can stand out.
Can you give us like the top 3 reasons that, if you can think of, made you successful? Just top 3 generally, if you can come up with. And there are many reasons, obviously, and many people behind your success. But if you could just name top 3 reasons or top 3 people that you feel like in the moment that made you successful.
Well, first of all, my family, my parents, my aunts and uncles. I think I wouldn't be here without their help and support. As I said, my father passed away when I was 16. My mother didn't go to college, so I had to lean on their support and also my own work ethic to get myself through college and then law school. And so I wouldn't be here without them.
Mm.
I think another huge factor in my success is, and I'll credit the University of Georgia School of Law, because I ended up going there on a full scholarship.
Mm.
I don't know how else I would have paid for law school, but I got a full scholarship, got a great education, and I don't think I would be a judge here in Georgia except that I went to University of Georgia School of Law, and the only reason I went there was because of the scholarship that I got.
Mm.
And then finally, I guess I would say Judge O'Kelly again, because he
Mm.
was just he was such a great mentor throughout my legal career, especially as a young lawyer when I was trying to decide what firm to go to. And then when I was applying for my first judgeship, he gave me so much great advice, and I was able to emulate him on the bench. He was a great judge.
Mm.
Not only did he know the law, but he was so professional. And that's the kind of judge I wanted to emulate on the bench.
That was one that you could look at towards and say, this is how I want to be as a judge.
Yes.
What a great lesson. Justice McMillian, and I know you may have already said this, but I'd like to ask again, how do you want to be remembered personally and as the Supreme Court Justice?
Well, I think personally, I don't know. I just want to be remembered as mother of James and Emily. That they're great. They end up being great adults, great people. That's what's really important to me in my personal life. As far as a legacy as a Supreme Court justice, I just hope people remember me as a justice who upholds the rule of law, like I said before. That is so important to the confidence of the judicial system, that the public's confidence in the judicial system, that they know that judges, we're here to apply the law as it's written, that we're not here to decide cases based on what we feel like or who the parties are. And I think that is very, very important. And I hope that that's going to be the legacy that I leave for the Georgia Court of Appeals and Georgia Supreme Court.
Well, thank you, Justice McMillian. This was an honor, and it was fascinating. And I hope we can have you again when maybe you're the U.S. Supreme Court Justice.
Well, we'll see about that. I don't know.
Thank you.